very honored to be here to start off our session on assistive tech and professional inclusion. I am your session chair for the next an hour and a half. My name is Jaisie. I'm an assistant professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And first off, we have Tingting presenting the paper How They Type, Eye and Finger Movement Strategies in Typing of Individuals with Cerebral Palsy. I am very happy to announce that this is a recipient of the Best Paper Award, which is awarded to the top 1% of papers at CHI. Can everyone give a round of applause while I go hand off the certificate? Congratulations. It looks like this. So very fancy, very, you want to come up? Come off the stage. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Tingting to go give a presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tingting Song from the Institute of Psychology Chinese Academy of Science. I'd like to start with a simple question. What happens when typing is no longer a smooth automatic action, but something uncertain, effort, and constantly negotiated? For many individuals with cerebral palsy, typing is not just input. It is a continuous process of adaptation. Today, I will share our work, How They Type, eye and finger movement strategies in typing of individuals with cerebral palsy. Most assistive typing research focuses on improving speed accuracy, but this assumes something important, that users are simply limited versions of typical texts. Our observations suggest something different. They are not passive users with deficits. They are active strategies. So instead of asking how can we make them faster, we ask how are they already making typing work. To answer this, we build a multimodal lens into typing, because typing is not just pressing keys, it involves coordination between motor control, timing, and visual attention. So we captured all three. Specifically, hand movement using motion tracking, keystroke dynamics such as timing and errors, and edges use eye tracking glasses. This allows us to go beyond outcomes and understand the process of typing. We collected data from a relatively large sample for this population, 32 participants, including 31 individuals with cerebral palsy. This is important because studies on this population are often limited in scale, and variability between individuals is high. So having this sample allows us to observe consistent patterns as well as individuals' difference. After introducing our participants, let me briefly explain what we measured. We analyzed the typing behavior from 4 aspects: background, performance, edges, and finger movement. For performance, in addition to standard metrics like typing speed, keystroke involved, and error rates, we introduced additional metric, the variability of inter-keystroke involves. This allows us to capture something beyond the speed, the stability of typing rhythm. Now moving to edges, we also go beyond traditional measures. In addition to fixing and edge shifts, we introduce the proportion of ineffective time. This measures the amount of time spent on usual behavior that does not directly contribute to typing. For example, repeatedly checking or visually drawing interruptions. This is particularly important for CP users because the visual process can be affected. So this metric helps us to understand the hidden cost of visual composition. Let's first at performance as episode compared to non-disabled types. CP users type more slow, have higher error rates, and so less stable timing. Those differences are real, but they don't tell the whole story because when we look at keyboard efficiency, which references how effectively keystrokes contribute to final text, we found something surprising. It is comparable between the two groups. This suggests that CP users are not simply less efficient. They are efficient in a different way. Let's look at keys. CP users look at the keyboard more, shift keys more frequently, fix it more often. At first glance, this looks inefficient, but it's not. It's a strategy. We call this a high confirmation strategy. They trade speed for condition, visually confirming its action to maintain control, and importantly, they do this without wasting visual attention. Now let's move to finger behavior. Traditional typing adds more fingers leads to better performance, but our data shows more fingers don't automatically translate into better performance. Instead, we observe that CP users rely on a small number of fingers, repeatedly use the same fingers, and form stable, personalized usage patterns. We identify several distinct patterns across users. So what matters is not how many fingers are used, but how reliably they are used. It's not about covering more keys, it's about consistency and control. We also test factors like keyboard layout. One may add more large distance between keys would slow typing down, but we did not find a significant effect. Instead, performance is more influenced by coordination, stability, and visual strategies. This stress that bottleneck is not the keyboard itself, but the interaction between perception and attention. Those findings shift how we should design. Instead of forcing using into optimal typing, we should support their strategies. This leads to 4 directions. 1. Assist, don't overread. 2. Reduce visual burden. 3. Design for real fingers. 4. Respect diversity. Different CP types need different support. Stepping back, this is not just about typing. It reflects a broader principle. Accessibility is not about fixing users, it's about understanding adaptation and design systems that work with human strategies, not against them. So our key message is CP users are active self-regulators. Here is my email and our lab's QR code. I'd love to connect it if you are interested. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tingting. We have room for 1 or 2 questions. We have a roaming mic. Please raise your hand if you have a question. No, that was a false hand. Okay. I have a question. So my research is on virtual reality and conversational voice technologies, and I was very happy to see at the very end where in your second last slide you mentioned some future directions that can be taken. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Like, what suggestions do you have if I want to make voice technologies or virtual reality more accessible to people with cerebral palsy? Can you let me know your advice for virtual reality development for people with cerebral palsy? Can you give me more advice? Okay, no worries. It looks like we might go too in-depth into it. I'll ask you later. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause. Okay, and then invite the next speaker to come get set up. Okay, next we have many awards to celebrate. I'm very happy, especially in regards to the accessibility space. Today, our next talk is Zheyuan Zhang talking about understanding workplace relations, support among healthcare professionals, and this, congratulations. Zheyuan and co-authors have received an honorable mention award to the top 5%. So please, round of applause. Okay, so that's all yours to receive, and the floor is all yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the morning session here. My name is Zheyuan, and I'm here to present our work on understanding workplace relatedness support for healthcare professionals. Before I start, I would like to express a great thank you to all the co-authors from Imperial College, University of Cambridge, UCL, and CW Plus charity. Before I jump into our project, I would like to ask you to reflect on what is relatedness to you. So there are many definitions on relatedness. Some define it as connection, social support, and cohesion, which are all important for healthcare professionals because multiple studies has found that healthcare professionals rely significantly on their social support and peer support when they face challenges, especially like COVID-19. But in the meantime, also other psychological theories have provided many understandings on relatedness as well. For example, the belongingness hypothesis, social identity theory, and sense of community theory all provided different aspects of understanding and interpretation of relatedness. But at this study, we decided to adopt self-determination theory as a theoretical background because self-determination theory not only identifies and explains what relatedness is, but it also identifies relatedness as one of the 3 key psychological needs for human well-being and motivation. So it identifies these 3 needs as core fundamental human nutrients for long-term motivation and engagement, which is quite relevant to our study. And also it has been extensively tested and empirically validated across diverse cultures. In the meantime, it is quite useful for HCI research, and also it has validated measures for people to use, so it's quite handy as well. But even if we decided to adopt a self-determination theory, there are still several gaps in the current literature. The first one is there is still a lack of nuanced and contextualized understanding on relatedness, as for the literature is now with self-determination theory. I'll give you a quick example if you could see here. This is a well-validated and widely used workplace basic need satisfaction scale, which defines workplace relatedness as at work I feel part of a group, or someone at work are close friends of mine, which are pretty generic and doesn't offer too much nuance and too much contextualized knowledge. And the second gap is how could technology support workplace relatedness? This is also less defined and is evidenced by the previous literature review done by Wenhart and colleagues. In their literature review published in CHI last year, they found that the relatedness technologies doesn't focus too much on workplace relatedness. Instead, many of the literature actually focus on closed and intimate relationships. So to address these 2 gaps, we propose a two-phase design study, and the first phase is semi-structured interviews with a total number of 15 healthcare professionals. We talked about stress coping methods and connections with colleagues, and also preferences for relatedness support. Also, we use inductive reflexive semantic analysis to analyze the qualitative data and participant feedback. In our first round of coding and reflective semantic analysis, we identified several themes and sub-themes as layout here. And then in our second round of analysis, we actually find some interrelated patterns of these themes. And that's why we decided to provide some of the higher level definition of relatedness at work. And then these 4 layers then becomes and formalizes as the 4-layer model of workplace relatedness that we would like to propose in our study here. These are informal interaction, camaraderie and bond, community and organizational care, and also shared identity. I'll walk through them one by one and provide a little bit of details. So the first layer is in informal interaction. It captures the spontaneous and everyday social exchanges. Our participants highlighted some of the most meaningful support happens actually in small groups and happens informally in their daily lives. For example, quick chats and coffee chats and between shift conversations and lighthearted conversations during their breaks is really meaningful and important for them. And the second layer goes a little bit deeper into their camaraderie and bond, which reflects their deeper relationships built on daily interactions, deepened trust, and mutual support. They also highlighted the importance of safe and supportive environments where they feel comfortable asking for help and seek for suggestions and disclose their mental health support needs. And the third layer actually goes beyond the individual interactions into a more systematic and organizational perspective. Participants also expressed that they feel it is important to feel supported and valued by their organizations, which they define is just as important as the peer-to-peer and peer support relationships. And the final layer, which is quite particular and distinctive in our studies, is we propose that shared identity is also one of the major psychological or relatedness needs satisfaction sources. So participants in our study described a strong sense of shared purpose and responsibility as they are working in the NHS, which is a public healthcare institution. And even when they encounter colleagues from NHS that they are not personally familiar with, they still feel the shared sense of commitment and shared sense of devotion to the healthcare. So after we developed the 4-layer model, we then conducted a second phase of the study, which is the co-design workshops with a total number of 21 healthcare professionals in 5 workshops. So in the workshops, we briefed them about self-determination theory and relatedness, and then we decided to ask them about the relatedness design ideas. And then we are able to categorize 8 design concepts that they developed to support their workplace relatedness using technology. One of the examples is playful encounters. It refers to technology-mediated interactions designed to create lightweight, spontaneous, and enjoyable social moments between colleagues. And the other interesting one is co-located action, which is basically using technology to support co-located actions in their workplace. And it encouraged healthcare professionals to set up initial communications and relationships, and also encounters and allow them to create deeper bonds. So in our reflection, this actually supports 2 levels of needs: informal interaction and camaraderie and bond. This also happens for many other concepts. I don't have the time to walk through them all, but feel free to see our paper or talk with me. I'll introduce many of the other concepts to you as well. So for example, the expressing appreciation supports 3 levels of relatedness needs. So after our reflection, we were able to map all the relatedness technologies onto the 4-layer models. So we can see that different technologies actually support different layers. And also some concepts could support multiple layers if carefully designed and developed or implemented. And also this also highlights the complex and multi-layered nature of relatedness needs. And also it also suggests that if a well-designed and well-implemented intervention on relatedness is developed, it can support relatedness in different layers as well. So to wrap up, our study proposed a 4-layer model, and we propose that related needs are complex and layered, and also these layers are not independent, but they are interdependent, and also technology in the future should consider multiple layers simultaneously. And a little bit of information to wrap up is that looking ahead, as healthcare systems all over the world become more and more digitized and AI-enabled, we argue that all the time saved by AI scribing tools or other related tools should be reinvested into human connection, supporting healthcare professionals' relatedness on different layers. And also, designers should embed relatedness supportive principles into digital healthcare systems. In the end, we proposed that cross-cultural validation for this scale is also needed, as this study is based on the UK sample and specifically England sample. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Please feel free to scan this QR code for our paper. And I'm on the job market as well, so if you happen to know someone with a potential opportunity, please reach out to me via this code here, and I would be really appreciated. Thank you so much. Any questions?
It's someone on the job market with an honorable mention too. But okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand up. Our runners will bring the mic to you. In the meantime, can I ask the next presenter to come get set up at the front?
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'm Tawanna, Dillahunt, University of Michigan. I'm just curious, what are some aspects of interrelatedness that you might see cross-culturally that we might want to be aware of? What do you think are some things that we might have in common, or things that might differ?
Thank you for the question. This is actually quite valuable and related to my study, because I conducted similar studies in China and in the UK as well. Funnily, when we think about collectivist cultures and individualist cultures, we often think that maybe the collectivist cultures are more supported by their organization or community, but in my interview, at least in my co-design studies and interviews, the community aspect is actually less focused on the Chinese sample. I didn't dive in too deep enough to figure out what is the reason behind it, but the interesting finding is that the UK sample, which is often considered to be like an individual society, they actually kind of focused more on the value of community support, and they are more willing to reach out for support among their communities and speak up. So that's quite of a nice or interesting findings on cross-cultural sort of aspects. Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap up that presentation. Another round of applause. Okay, and next I am pleased to introduce Liangyue, who will be talking to us about a study of blind TikTokers' alternative professional development experiences. Take it away.
Thank you, Session Chair. Hello, everyone. This is Yao from University of Michigan, and I'm presenting a paper on blind people's use of TikTok. The title is quite long. My brother is a school principal, earns about $30,000 per year, but when the kids see me, wow, uncle, you have 1,500 followers on TikTok. It's a study of blind TikTokers' alternative development, professional development experiences. The authors include me, my postdoc advisor, Dr. Tawanna Dillahunt, my collaborator, Jiaying Liu, and my PhD advisor, Dr. Zhang Carroll. Our presentation includes background, related work, methods, and takeaways, findings and takeaways. Professional development is a core part of modern life, shaping how people achieve career path, social recognition, and economy stability. However, it has been traditionally been defined by institutions like universities and workplaces, which often create structural barriers for people with disabilities, including limited accessibility, including limited access and inaccessibility. Recently, social media platforms have started to reshape professional development by enabling more flexible career, increasing visibility, and open up alternative forms of income and networking beyond traditional institutions. However, for people with disabilities, these platforms are not purely enabling. Prior work shows that accessibility issues and algorithmic biases can introduce new forms of exclusion. As a result, we still lack a clear understanding of how professional development is actually experienced and negotiated by people with disabilities in these platform-based environments. Therefore, we asked 3 questions and then did a comprehensive and in-depth study on people with disabilities experiences of professional development and social media platforms. In this paper, we introduced an interview study on the professional development experiences of people with vision impairments on TikTok, who are also known as blind talkers. I can share a little bit background of TikTok since it's already pervasive. Everyone knows that. So it's a very visually driven platform characterized by short-form video content, hashtag-based community structures, and algorithmically curated content feeds. This study is a part of a long-term ethnography project investigating the blind community on TikTok. And then we asked 3 research questions. First, what are the primary professional goals for blind talkers? Then, what strategies do blind talkers use to leverage for the goals? And then, what challenges do blind talkers encounter? To answer the question, we designed an interview study, and then the research methods report include our research design and researcher positionality. The study is a part of a long-term ethnography project, and then the overarching goal of this large project is to understand how TikTokers with visual impairments use platforms, especially from an accessibility perspective. But then when we proceed with this project, we found that participants' feedback, they talk a lot about how they are doing job seeking, professional training, and income increase. So in response, we added a dedicated section to the interview protocol to explore these areas in greater depth. So we conducted semi-structured interviews that includes not only the overall perceptions of TikTok, but also another list of professional development experiences like networking, monetizing, advertising, getting sponsorship, learning and practicing, and seeking jobs. So Finally, we interviewed 60 participants with diverse backgrounds between 18 years old and 45 years old, with the majority identify as women, and in terms of vision impairment, most of them are legally blind, with some having low vision or totally blindness. The research team acknowledged that the authors' identities have shaped this study, and the first author, a non-disabled man, was primarily involved in conducting the research, and the other authors reviewed and support this statement. So grounded in social constructionism, I acknowledge that my understanding of accessibility and vision impairment is shaped by academic training and most importantly, participants' lived experiences. To mitigate my bias, I engage in reflexive practices, follow the principle of nothing about us without us, and prioritize participants' voices through member checking, consultation, and advocates. So next, I will present the findings section. As you can see, this is an overview of the findings. Blind talkers' profession development involves seeking employment, attracting customers, changing the professional paths, and also becoming professional TikTokers. So they got a large variety of strategies, and then we organized these findings as 3 themes, primary goals, strategies of leveraging TikTok, and those challenges for them when they are seeking professional development. So many of our participants describe job searching as frustrating and uncertain, often shaped by discrimination and limited opportunities in traditional contexts. At the same time, platforms like TikTok introduce new possibilities where visibility, content, and engagement can signal value in ways traditional systems do not. As a result, blind talkers are navigating between these worlds using social media, not just for expression, but also as a critical space for pursuing professional development. In terms of strategies, blind talkers actively leverage TikTok to build professional identity and influence. One key approach is to find a unique niche if they choose to be a TikToker. As an example shows, participants don't just consume content, they critically reflect on what is missing, especially perspectives from people with vision impairments. Then they create content to fill that gap, such as comparing experiences between sighted and blind users. In doing so, they turn their lived experiences into expertise, using TikTok not just as a platform for visibility, but also as a space to define their own professional value. While TikTok creates new opportunities, participants also face significant challenges shaped by platform socio-technical environment. On the technical side, accessibility limitations make content creation and interaction more difficult, often requiring additional efforts and workouts. And sometimes it's even like shadow bans that goes against marginalized groups. In addition to technical barriers, blind talkers also face significant social challenges on the platform. As the example shows, participants frequently encounter skepticism and harassment, where their identities and abilities are questioned. Even when clearly demonstrating that they are using technology, they are still met with disbelief and dismissive comments. To conclude, we argue that a traditional definition of professional development are institutionalized and often exclusionary. In contrast, social media platforms like TikTok offer an alternative pathway enabling more flexible, personalized, and accessible forms of professional growth. Based on the findings, we propose the framework called alternative professional development, where individuals use platforms to shape their own careers. This includes having greater control and redefine disability, pursuing individualized measurement of access, and diversifying income outsources. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, once again, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Please raise your hand. We have one in the middle. If I can ask my microphone runners, thank you. And yeah, and the next presenters are already set up.
Thanks for your presentation. Lan from University College London on Disability Innovation, Global Disability Innovation Hub. I actually have conducted some research related to Black Talker, and also I'm conducting one Black Talker in Kenya. One question is about, do you have any reflection or funding that relate to the local government support about the professional development of the Black Talker. Also, any other like public service gonna be involved into that, like DPO or things like that? Yeah.
That's a great question because our research includes, this is like primarily in the United States, but we also cover some TikTokers in UK actually. So they said, actually it was from the UK participant, they told us that they had the experience of getting sponsorship from the government for example, posting some content that is related to becoming like a blind content creators, that, you know, those kind of pathway, encouragement, empowerment. In the United States, we didn't find that kind of evidence yet, but in the paper, we do advocate for more organizational level support that, for example, training programs, more let's say, inclusive monetization model from TikTok to make this career path more accessible and inclusive for blind talkers.
We have time for one more question if there's anybody. Okay, I invite all questions at the end. One more round of applause, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is another recipient of an honorable mention. Congratulations to Hayoun, Noel, and co-authors for their paper, A Longitudinal Ethnography of North Korean Defectors, First Year Digital Transition in South Korea. Here's your award. Maybe we can look at the camera. Okay, and we look forward to hearing your talk. The stage is all yours.
All right, so I'll start. My name is Hayoun No. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Oxford. My lovely co-author also here as an SV, Hyuna Jo. Thank you everyone for being here. And today I'll be presenting our longitudinal research with newly arrived North Korean defectors in South Korea. So our paper is presenting their lived stories of 5 women navigating their first year in South Korea after defecting from North Korea many years ago and have resided in China for almost 25 years. So before I begin further, I would like to note that our presentation may contain some sensitive discussions around human trafficking and forced marriage a little bit, but we would like to preserve participants' language as it is as possible to faithfully represent their experiences. So what do I mean by North Korean defectors, especially newly arrived North Korean defectors? So since the Korean War, which was around 80 years ago, 2 South Koreas have been completely separated. So which means that in order for individuals to come to South Korea, even though it's just a few hours away, they have to do a very, very big and long detour to finally get to South Korea. But this is not a very easy journey. Not many people are actually able to make this journey successfully. It has gotten much worse since 2020 COVID-19. So the North Korean border have been practically sealed, and the numbers of people arriving directly from North Korea have been less than 10 people a year. So just like our participants, most people that's successfully reaching South Korea are the ones who are coming directly from China. And more than 80 of them are women. And because they have to live their lives in hiding in order to hide their undocumented migrant status, they're exposed to a lot of vulnerability. And many research states that for any newcomers, the most difficult and most important stage of adaptation is the first few years. And as an HCI researcher, what makes this particularly important is the digital component to it. So North Korea is practically, there's 0 internet penetration, making it the least digitally connected society in the world. And China is, as we know already, it's very highly digitally connected, but because of their undocumented status and their needs for hiding constantly, the access of digital technology is very much constrained. And in South Korea is actually statistically one of the most digitally connected society in the world. And they come to South Korea as a legally recognized citizen. But they're actually entering the whole world of digitally connected society for the first time. And this is how research begins, because although we know the importance of the first year, there isn't really much research really understanding what is going on in the first year. So what are the challenges and why are they so complicated? And how do their past experiences are influencing this process? So in order to understand this up close, we took very varied methods through a longitudinal ethnography. So it took the entire data collection was 8 months long. We started with building relationships through multiple phone calls, which took about the whole month. And then we conducted a lot of in-person sessions to conduct interview and also digital assistant session, which is where the researcher was with the field, in the field with the participants together and really helping them to get by. Like for instance, I was topping up their metro cards and we were going on the bus together, we were navigating the maps together. And then throughout the whole 8 months, bi-weekly, we were contacting for the entire 8 months, but it was actually much more often than bi-weekly because researcher on call was always available whenever they had any questions, and they were texting us and calling us whenever they had any questions, as you can see as an example. So these are our 5 women that I will be sharing with you today, their stories. Younghee, Jiaying, Eunju, Sunok, and Haesuk. As you can see, all of them have lived a very, very long years in hiding in China. And they were living under the Chinese husband, which through the forced marriage, under their identity because that was the only safe way of living in China. For Jiaying, she was also living under the Chinese husband's identity, but she escaped from the forced marriage a really long time ago. So for her, she was actually borrowing multiple people's identity. The biggest challenge for our participant was the very drastic, stark contrast of invisibility and visibility. So what I mean by that is in China, being invisible was the goal. They could not be visible, so they were living under someone else's name, meaning everything they did was under someone else's name. In Korea, everything was completely the opposite. They became completely visible over one day. And everything was under their own name for the first time, especially in a digitally connected society for the first time. And it came with a lot of responsibility that they did not know how to be responsible for. And it required them a lot of constant demands for actions. As a simple example, they started to receive so many promotion messages that we are all very aware of, but they didn't know how to distinguish them from important electricity bills. So what ended up happening is that the important bills went unpaid, and they ended up signing for the unlimited data storage or these crazy promotions that they did not actually need to sign up for. And they're a very easy target for scam and voice phishing in South Korea because of their defector identity. And it happened to our participant as well. So 2 months after arrival, Eunju, our participant, started receiving very realistic scam calls, who knows everything about their name and address and their defector status. And she only got to know that that was a scam call after chatting with the researcher, which to researcher, it was very clear that it was a scam call. And as she said, I lived invisibly for so many years, and now I feel like I'm exposed to the whole world. And their strategy that they took, all of them, was simply ignoring and deleting all the messages from unknown numbers. It was helpful in some sense, but it actually led to very important messages such as governmental resettlement supports or benefits that they were entitled to. It went unnoticed, and they couldn't receive those messages so much through this strategy. And interestingly, one thing that was actually really different from the participants who don't reside in China but actually use China as a transit country, so between that group and between our participant who have resided in China for over 10 to 25 years, they actually knew how to navigate some of the basic apps in China. So for instance, Baidu, the search engine, they were quite good at it. They were using WeChat on a daily basis, so they had the digital skills to actually navigate some of these basic apps. But interestingly, it didn't transfer. So they felt like they were complete beginners again, and the word that they were using was the gatekeeping. Because South Korean society and the digital ecosystem is so intertwined, one participant said that even getting a haircut is requiring an online reservation. And it wasn't just about inconveniences of not getting a haircut, which is probably more than an inconvenience, but it led to social exclusion. So they were very much, very often laughed at when they didn't know very simple terms or simple like digitally used terms. Also, importantly, one example I would like to highlight is about getting a job. Getting a job was very much of a digitally mediated process through LinkedIn and through so many other online platform. But not only she didn't know how to do that, but she didn't know how to record her past because it was for her, the last 10 years was completely undocumented. And also the formal classes and trainings that they were receiving just simply did not match their reality at all. They were learning how to make slides when it was their first time to ever see a computer. So, and what they actually needed was how to get by, how to take metro, and how to shop through using Korean version Amazons. And the only thing that really worked for them was learning by doing. But it took them a really long time. So it took them approximately 2 to 3 months to be able to get outside of their flat again alone and roam around freely in the city. But it was the only thing that really worked. The trials and errors and getting lost and getting help denied and calling the researcher multiple times, it was the thing that really helped them navigate the society. So although these experiences seem extremely unique to North Korean defectors, our findings are showing very important implications on how we could better design digital adaptation. So first one is that we argue in the paper that digital adaptation should not be acquiring skills. It's very much of navigating the different socio-technical mismatches. So for our participants, it was very important for the resettlement to actually understand where they're coming from. So although they knew how to navigate certain apps, it did not transfer. So we argue for the importance of understanding the digital habitus as an effective support system. And the second one is we emphasize the importance of the temporal process of it. Digital adaptation is definitely not a one-off thing, and currently a lot of resettlement programs are focusing on the immediate phase of it. But we argue for the importance of long-term phase because as they resettle and then they go into the long-term, the independence becomes very important and the help seeking is extremely stigmatized because they think they should have known it already. And we see that the technological and AI support could be extremely helpful in this sense because it could provide the non-judgmental support. And lastly, we actually see a very important user group as a unconventional non-user, which is the people who are digitally excluded, but it's actually not recognizable. Just like our participants probably one of the most heavily digitally excluded people. However, because they're physically able, they're relatively young, like 30 and 40s, and they're indistinguishable appearance-wise from South Koreans, so their help seeking was constantly denied in social settings. So as an HCI researcher, we would really like to emphasize the importance of further exploring unconventional non-user as a digital excluded group. All right, and I'll end with one reflection. So this is a quote that was shared with us by all of the participants, and it really made us wonder what digital adaptation or adaptation even means beyond what facilitates it or what complicates it, which was the focus of our study. And in the first phase of 2025, only 46 defectors arrived to South Korea. And that's definitely not because only 46 of them tried. And it made us wonder how rarely their voices can be heard, especially going forward in the future. So on that note, I would like to say thank you so much for being able to share and listen to their stories and allowing us to bring their voices into this space. Thank you, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Hayoun. To the audience, for any questions, we have time for 1 or 2. We have one here in the middle, and then I also invite the next speaker to please come and get set up.
Thank you so much. I think it's such an interesting and meaningful research. My hometown is actually near the border between China and North Korea, and on the China side, obviously. So I wonder who would you reckon to be the actors in this? Because these are amazing takeaways, but I wonder who could step up to support with the adoption.
Oh, in South Korean context, you mean?
In general, yeah.
So in South Korean context, and correct me if I'm not answering your question right. So in South Korean context, there's actually quite a huge resettlement support happening to actually around the border as well. And South Korean government and also there are a lot of NGOs, a lot of religious organizations are helping out with these newcomers to actually not only settle in South Korea, but actually to get to South Korea. So that has been very active. And in terms of our implication, we talk about it much more in depth in the paper, obviously, but we do actually see a lot of similarities for refugees and asylum seekers, not just North Korean defectors. It's slightly different because of the digital habitus and the exposure to digital technology is far less for these participants. But we do see a lot of refugees even coming into Europe just simply because if you're in a war, the use of digital technology is so different, it's just so constrained. There isn't even a proper internet. So we do actually see a broader impact of our implication and hopefully it would reach them as well, yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, one more round of applause. Thank you so much. Okay, and then on to our next speaker. Jingxing Li will be talking to us about how to embrace chaos again. The long title will be Tracing Boundary Negotiating Artifacts in Knowledge Workers' Data Practices for Collaborative Public Health Crises Response. The stage is all yours.
All right, thank you. Hello, my name is Jensen Lee, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan School of Information. And my co-authors included Dr. Tiffany Vino and Dr. Elizabeth Yeko. So today I'm excited to present our work, Embracing Chaos Again, Tracing Boundary Negotiating Artifacts in Knowledge Workers' Data Practices for Collaborative Public Health Crisis Response. So essentially this is a study to understand people, their collaboration and the artifacts and these social technical arrangements around that collaboration. And the context here is a public health crisis. We interviewed 15 university researchers to understand during COVID-19 how these knowledge workers form a partnership with a state-level health department, look at the knowledge workers' collaborative data practices. So we're especially interested in the artifacts involved, and we draw on Charlotte Lee's theory of boundary negotiating artifacts, or BNA, as our analytical lens. So our motivation really comes from two main gaps. First, government-academic data collaboration itself is an underexplored mode of data sharing in the literature. Government often have the resources and legitimacy to collect large amounts of valuable data, while academic researchers bring expertise in data analysis. However, it's unclear how these two sides actually work together when they form a data partnership out of certain needs. And then the second gap, so artifacts have long been a really compelling concept in the HCI and CACW communities. People have looked at how artifacts help foster shared understanding and facilitate coordination in collaborative work. Probably the most well-known and widely used concept is boundary objects. So it's introduced by Susan Lee Starr and colleagues. It's described as objects that help coordinate perspectives across different communities of practice. However, Charlotte Lee later argued that the representation and adoption of boundary objects rely quite heavily on the idea of standardization, and so some kind of alternative theories are needed to explain how collaborators from different communities of practice that lack pre-existing standards use artifacts to collaborate. So based on this, Lee proposed 5 types of boundary negotiating artifacts, and just for time, I won't go into their definitions here, but what's important here is Lee emphasizes that compared to boundary objects, these BNAs might be more prevalent in non-routine and complex collaboration, which is what both her paper and our paper refer to as chaos in the title. So that being said, there's been little to no existing research applying BNA theory to those highly chaotic crisis situations and the large-scale, complex, and non-routine collaboration that emerges within them. So more broadly speaking, to better prepare for future public health crises, we posed 2 research questions to understand, 1, what types of challenges do knowledge workers face in this kind of complex, cross-sector, cross-disciplinary data collaboration during a public health crisis? And 2, how do artifacts address or not address these challenges? So for the methods, we use interviews and document analysis, but I'll just skip over that for now. And our case looks at a data collaboration between a state team and a university team in the US. So during COVID-19, they worked together to co-develop 3 pandemic response technologies. These included a public website showing pandemic metrics maps and a web app for symptoms self-monitoring and reporting, and a series of vaccination data dashboard designed for public health officials. So we interviewed 15 university participants with different backgrounds, skill sets, and academic ranks. And in terms of roles, they can be grouped into epidemiologists, tech leads, product managers, a data science team, and a UX team. So results, just to give a high-level overview, we found that knowledge workers face 5 key challenges in this collaboration. So here I'll highlight the 4th and 5th ones, which really point to the political sensitivity that knowledge workers had to navigate in this collaboration. So for example, regarding the external pressures, this epidemiologist Bennett was actually pulled into a lawsuit just for providing public health evidence to the government. So as he said, I'm here to be a scientist, not a political scapegoat. And then for the internal authority asymmetries, we revealed that even though the state and university teams were supposed to be partners, the university personnel often still had to defer to final decisions made by the state officials, even when those decisions weren't what the university folks thought were the best approach. Sorry. So now in terms of artifacts, at a higher level, what participants told us is that during the crisis, many of the artifacts that were supposed to help them make sense of the data were either missing or just dysfunctional. So they had to kind of improvise, like creating new artifacts themselves or just making do with whatever they had on hand. So we did identify 14 artifacts mentioned by participants and map them onto at least 5 types of BNAs. But here, what I would highlight is that some data products were actually used as the so-called structuring artifacts. So by definition, these artifacts allow one party in the collaboration to set the tone among competing narratives and guide the activities of the other party. So one example from our case is that the university UX team did conduct user research and found that potential users of the pandemic metrics map website really wanted a map that clearly showed the pandemic control rules for each county. But the university PI, Victor, mentioned that the state would never let us do that map. They would put out various rules and they would leave it up to everyone else to do the interpretation of exactly how that rule applied. They didn't want that to somehow get codified. So the reason for this is that making the rules too explicit could invite pushback from stakeholders with different positions and needs, right? For example, business owners who wanted to stay open or others who prioritize safety. Yeah, so in the end, this map, which was never actually built, functioned as a structuring artifact. Like rather than helping reach consensus, it mainly served, like I mentioned earlier, to push university personnel toward compromise. So precisely because many of the artifacts in this crisis were either missing or not working, another key finding of our work is that there were 4 types of socio-technical arrangements actually playing a more effective role than material artifacts in sustaining the collaboration. So here I'll just focus on the second one, role configuration. Specifically, in public communication, the university team took on the role of experts, sharing evidence-based guidance with the public and essentially acting as an agent or say a buffer between the government and public. So as the PI Sienna put it, there were times that I actually was saying maybe you'd like as the university to put out something that is controversial but needed. The government really didn't want to touch political controversies with a 10-foot pole, but the university, I feel like in some cases, we could have those conversations. So in our paper, we also present a few theoretical and practical contributions. One thing I'd like to highlight here is that we introduced the idea of identity calibration to describe how these nudge workers navigated their dual roles during the pandemic as both scientific experts and crisis managers. So specifically, we draw on the concept of sense-making from organizational studies to argue that university personnel didn't just rely on material artifacts for making sense of the data. Actually, in many cases, they rely even more on the 4 types of socio-technical arrangements we identified to make sense of the broader and often politically sensitive situation. And that's what really helps sustain this crisis-driven collaboration. As for our other contributions, we proposed several new defining features for that kind of complexity and non-routineness to enrich how BNA theory conceptualizes a chaotic collaboration. And also going back to artifacts, we also provide some design implications for how to better prepare artifacts for future crises. So you can find more details in our paper. So I guess with that, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we have room for 1 or 2 questions. Please raise your hand. And in the meantime, I invite the next speaker to come get set up. Yep, we have one in.
Thank you for the presentation. I wonder, in the emergence of using AI for teamwork, how would you see the application of AI in terms of navigating these boundaries?
That is a good question. So, sorry, give me a second. I guess, because we did identify some design implications for this kind of cases, and one of the implications for that is we need some more tools for better tracking changes in data. So I think that's where more emerging AI tools can play a role, like diffing and also version control and also modification alerts, things like that. Yeah, so if AI can help identify whether it's errors or just differences between different versions of the data sets and report it to the collaborators in a more effective way, I think that would be awesome. Yeah.
We have room for 1 more question. Well, can I ask a question? What was the most surprising thing for you while you were doing your research that you think other people should know about?
Even for this particular study. I think it's how much a collaboration can be impacted by politics. Yeah, because there's a lot of the styles and the practices of governments and a university, like university researchers, are so different that sometimes, for example, public health experts or just epidemiologists, they have something to report, but it's just because of the conflicting stakeholder interests that they cannot let the public. Not that they cannot let them know, but just they have to kind of alter the way they communicate it to the public. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we can never escape office politics. Okay, 1 more round of applause as we move on to the next one. Okay. All right, next up we have Arshia Duda, who will be talking to us about a question of security at the border, the lived experiences of refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. The floor is all yours.
I'm Arsha. I'm from Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm presenting today on security at the border, the lived experiences of refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. So this work started in the summer of 2024 when the Rwanda Act and the political tensions in the UK were very ripe, and I wanted to look at the experiences of immigrants under that political climate, but also I have an HCI angle to it, so I also wanted to see like how they were navigating the not just like the border of UK itself, but also all the elements of the border that make the immigration system. So all the AI-based technologies, all biometrics, iris scanning, and so on and so forth. So I started with the research question: how do refugees and asylum seekers in the UK experience encounters with border control technologies and the wider immigration system, and how do these encounters shape their long-term sense of security? It's important to note here that HCI work has already grounded the fact that the immigrant security practices are not static, but they keep evolving with people's circumstances and their environmental constraints. So for me, for my work, the contributions were the fact that immigrants felt that they were suspect by default. They carried the anxieties from their first border encounter long after they arrived into the country, and oftentimes after they even got their refugee status or even got their green card to remain in the UK. A critical finding for me was the fact that caseworkers are a very important intermediary structure that is kind of holding up and is an important pillar to the system. And finally, directions for participatory and trauma-informed design approaches on improving these lived experiences. So the methodology was informed by this growing alignment towards looking at the lived experiences that form the entire immigration system and not just looking at one specific technology or one specific experience. So I had semi-structured interviews with 12 participants, so 6 of them were caseworkers and 6 of them were clients that visited this particular NGO in London. And the NGO was a key point for me because it was there that people navigated and reconstructed their experience of the border. So long after they had just crossed into the UK, they were still navigating the border, so to say, and the border experiences through documentation, through their interactions with all these different intermediaries, caseworkers, officials, and they were navigating life in the UK through this space of the NGO. And then I did reflexive thematic analysis to get to the different rounds of coding. My first finding was the fact that there is fear in the face of a faceless system. So a lot of people felt that they were experiencing a lot of these new technologies for the first time. They were experiencing what they call the civilized world for the first time, or the West, so to say, for the first time. And they were in both parts anxious, but also at the same time they were expectant because this was the life that they were coming into, having left like some amount of like conflict at home, some chaos, maybe they were being discriminated against back at home. So it was both parts, that they were anxious and they were very expectant of their futures. So I feel like this space of the NGO and these borders are where like, you know, past experiences and present futures, and then like the future expectations, they come together. So it formed like a ripe place to inquire into their experiences. So the language barriers, especially with all these different technologies, made it very difficult for some of them to navigate these processes. But the people that I spoke to were extremely open-minded about the way the system works, and they had a lot of faith in the system that was constantly giving them some sense of anxiety or insecurity. So they felt that the process was dehumanizing, but at the same time, they also thought that maybe this is something that they necessarily needed to navigate in order to reach a sense of security, a sense of safety. So here I would also say that this proves that HCI has been like long been saying that safety is not like secure, the sense of security is not just like digital or physical, but it's also ontological, and it's shaped by your literal being, and it's shaped by the way you belong and the way you navigate a certain system. The second finding was that the case workers are an important intermediary and essentially an extension of the entire immigration system. So they performed like 3 kinds of work: explanatory, where basically they were explaining all these different systems, be it the different technologies, be it the kind of things that they had, these immigrant groups had to submit, so to say, to the system. It was effective because this organization that I worked with did not have like a very dedicated mental health worker section or anything, and they were kind of navigating the mental turmoil or the mental, the trauma that these different immigrants coming into the UK faced when they were navigating the system. And finally, procedural, which like filling the forms for their asylum applications, for their kids, for housing, for legal battles, and so on and so forth. So these intermediaries are what is like connecting the bureaucracy to the real people, like the lived experiences. So they have to do a lot of the effective work and not just the procedural work in order for the system to uphold itself. The lasting imprint that they said the border has is something that repeatedly both the caseworkers and the different people that I've spoken to point out that it's not enough that they prove that they are here for legitimate reasons. It's not enough that their story checks out, so to say, but they have to also keep repeating the same facts over and over again, maintaining coherence in their story so as to come across as truthful and legitimate, because as said by a certain caseworker, they assume by default that you are lying, and then they try and verify facts towards the fact that you might be saying the truth. So this is something that obviously follows them, because even after 30 years in the UK, for one of the caseworkers who came as a refugee, he still feels that they still feel that they need to prove their place in the system, in the country, in order to belong. Finally, the discussion, we based the discussion on the idea, on the concept of racialized surveillance by Brown. And the othering here basically extends to this idea that the system decides who, it's not just like verifying or checking facts, but it's also deciding who belongs in a place and who is out of place. So this system is also creating the asymmetry where you are expected to be entirely transparent with your data, with all your facts, with your life story, but this system is extremely opaque and it is not meant to give you any closure on exactly how it is processing you, how it is viewing you, if the lens is racial or not, which in most cases it is. And as per different accounts by the respondents, there is differential treatment given in terms of nationality. So somebody from Africa or Southeast Asia are treated differently than somebody from Ukraine, because there are political hierarchies, there are different agendas at place when it comes to treating migrants from different places. Implications for design. So we had 3, I think, very preliminary design suggestions, because this is still an ongoing work. So this is something, the first one is something that came directly to us from some of the caseworkers, which is basically pre-border preparation in order for them to have like a standardized platform to begin. So at least some amount of information being given out to these migrants and the asylum seekers and refugees, so that the caseworkers can start from a certain point. So that involves multilingual videos, simulations, and guides that will help them navigate the border or wherever they arrive, be it by boats, be it at the airport. The second one was at the border, so trauma-informed design. A lot of people have cultural sensitivities when it comes to these different systems, and it kind of violates the norms of their culture when you are expected to expose yourself or like take off, say, a hijab when you're coming from Afghanistan, and so like one of the examples given to me. So that would be a lot easier to navigate if these systems were more culturally sensitive. And finally, the shift from individual, like looking at individual devices and technologies, to like an overall socio-technical growth in the system where everybody is equipped to better deal with all these different sensibilities. And finally, just as a caution, so that we do not end up normalizing borders at any level, to make sure that these systemic changes do not end up excluding people more than like including them. Thank you, and I would like to thank my supervisor and the participants in EPSRC for funding my research.
Okay, thank you so much. I invite questions from the floor. Please raise your hand up, and in the meantime, if the next speaker can come up and get set up. I have a question up at the front. Oh, and then we'll have one in the middle.
Thank you so much for your interesting work. Do you know if there are differences between the way UK immigration works and, let's say, US or other European places, or?
So in my literature review, I've obviously had to go through a lot of the different ways in which all these different immigration procedures work. So it's like different in France, it's different in Spain, it's different in the UK, it's sometimes different in Scotland as opposed to England. So it is like a lot of these different systems, these borders, they don't have the same technologies in use, right? And in many cases, the sensitivities are culturally given. So if a culture is more welcoming towards differences, then they will treat people with a little more, with a little more compassion, so to say. Then some culture would just be like, I just need the information. So it depends more on the social and political, the waves at play. Then it simply depends on how the technology works, because I think policy guides this process more than anything else.
A follow-up question there, thank you. Will be, in Latin America, many people, let's say from Venezuela, are escaping to other countries in Latin America. So I wonder if that will apply, do you think, to Argentina, let's say, when people escape from Venezuela into Argentina or other Latin American countries?
So in terms, like, if they would be more sensitive towards other immigrants because they are treated also discriminatively in the US that way. I do not think that's true. I do not think that's true. It's because every country has their own ideas of what is secure, and there's this wave of nationalistic fervor that is going around. So everybody is like, we don't want other people, right? So I cannot say that one place is better than the other just because people are discriminated against in that place. I would not say that. That would be wrong. But what I do think is that if a place has fewer, degree of reliance on technology is lower, then I think it is more prone to treating people more fairly. Yeah.
Hi, Shiva Darian at New Mexico State University. Can you speak to what it was like to be having these interviews paired with like the nonprofit and the people? Like, so you gain the trust through the nonprofit, and so how did you balance those dynamics?
Okay, this is an important thing I didn't get to mention because of time constraints. So consent was a big deal in this entire process. Informed consent was very difficult to get because of language barriers, because signing a document is a big deal for some of these people because they don't sign in English, they sign in their native languages, etc. So thank you for that question. I had to navigate this very delicately because the nonprofit was kind of mediating all my conversations with these people. So everybody, all the asylum speakers and refugees I spoke to, they were in the room with me with their caseworkers so as to feel secure, so that they did not feel coerced, they did not have to give out any information they didn't want to. I'm well aware that they were under the impression that they might be receiving some benefits from doing this interview, but I had to repeatedly assure them that I have no hand in their application if they did this interview or without doing it. So there is a possibility that some of these outcomes are mediated and it's not exactly what they would have said. But I guess that's the issue with this kind of work.
Okay, thank you so much. One more round of applause. Okay, and towards our final speaker of the session, but last but not least, we have Jonathan Leuenberger talking about transient non-use, how people in migration experience digital disconnection. The floor is all yours.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. This study is about how people in migration experience and navigate periods of digital disconnection, whether intentional or not. My name is Jonathan Leuenberger, and this work was conducted in collaboration with my colleagues at the Data Advocacy Research Lab at New Mexico State University. Technology has increasingly become a vital part of human migration. Mobile phones have been considered as important as water and food for people in migration. But what happens when people lose access to these phones, or when they intentionally don't use them? Our study takes place in El Paso, Texas, USA, one of the largest points of entry into the US. El Paso sits at the end of a long, often multi-year journey through many countries. Take, for example, this map of one of our participants. Their journey began over 10 years ago in Venezuela, where due to deteriorating conditions, they fled to Colombia, where they tried to resettle for 2 years. When things eventually got worse, they walked for a month all the way to Uruguay. Eventually, when things began to get even worse and they started to receive death threats, they decided to make the 2-year-long journey north to the US. During this journey, they had to cross the Andes Mountains, the Darien Gap, and the Chihuahuan Desert, passing through numerous humanitarian aid camps along the way. They were even deported once inside of Mexico before they reached Mexico City, where they could begin applying for US asylum. This participant's story, while harrowing, is unfortunately not unique. Almost all of our participants experienced this kind of journey, having to resettle in multiple countries before deciding to come to the US, often having to walk a large majority of this distance and having to navigate complex legal systems. During journeys like this, all of our participants experience device non-use. Technology non-use is the lack, refusal, or rejection of technology use. Whether forced, strategic, or driven by fear, it is always a response to the conditions people in migration face, not a failure to engage. Examining non-use allows us to understand how people in migration actively navigate uncertainty and power through acts of refusal. To understand more about this journey, we asked 3 research questions. How do people on the move experience unintentional non-use? How and why do people on the move intentionally avoid ICTs? And finally, what practices do people on the move use when ICTs are inaccessible? To understand these experiences, we interviewed 32 participants in El Paso from February to May 2025. All of these individuals self-identified as being in migration. All these interviews were conducted in either English or Spanish. For the purpose of my presentation today, all the quotes will show the original Spanish on the left with the English translation on the left, Spanish on the right. After conducting and translating all these interviews, we then analyzed these interviews with thematic qualitative coding. When we initially began our analysis, we set out to look for technology use. But as we continued our analysis, we began to see what wasn't happening. We began to notice technology non-use. Within this, we noticed that unintentional non-use was coming from a lack of choice, whereas intentional non-use was a way to regain agency for these people. We found that people in migration experience, create, and respond to many different forms of non-use. We describe these examples as device, informational, and protective non-use. These different forms of disconnection often systematically occurred due to either environmental conditions caused or technology removal by powerful stakeholders, by cartels, other governments along the journey, or the US government. For the purpose of this talk, I will be talking about the US government, but we'll go into the rest of these in our paper. Let's start with device non-use. Device non-use is persistent, described by almost all of our participants. Here, periods of disconnection were caused by institutional actions. One participant, when asked about their cellular access during detainment, said, "There are like 30 to 40 people in a single room they have given to everyone. And is there internet? No. At this moment, are there people using their cell phones? No, there is no one. Absolutely no one goes with cell phones." Here, disconnection was made into a policy that silenced detainees, preventing them from seeking legal help or reassuring their families. This is an image of the El Paso Detention Center where this was taking place. This example highlights how non-use was often circumstantial and was out of the person's control. This created conditions in which people experiencing migration were both dependent on and yet excluded from the systems that were meant to support their journey. The next type of non-use is informational non-use. Informational non-use is when people in migration cannot or choose not to engage with informational resources or infrastructures. We divide informational non-use based on intentionality. Unintentional non-use is misunderstanding and misinformation created by cartels and guides withholding important information about its routes, risks, and timings. Additionally, US government systems create instances where people in migration are forced to comply with harsh and exploitative behavior due to the removal of information. After crossing into the US, participants were detained in large rooms and cycled through numerous interrogations with immigration officers. One participant described this confusion they and other detainees felt after questioning. Throughout the whole room, one could hear people saying, "Also, what did they explain to you?" "No, they did not explain anything." "Nothing." "What did they say to you?" "I didn't understand." "What did they ask you?" "Nothing, just sign." One is signing, one does not know what is signed. It is bad. This account shows how systems can exclude users by enforcing the mandatory signing of legal documents without any attempt to address language barriers. This instance, however, was not singular. Many of our participants described signing forms without access to translational tools, making their supposed consent hollow. Rather than the unintentional and forced non-use we previously discussed, this intentional form of non-use was a way to reclaim power in the face of oppressive and exploitative behaviors. Intentional non-use was an intentional avoidance of federal visibility. To avoid this visibility from the US government, several of our participants crossed the US-Mexico border undocumented by avoiding the now defunct CBP-1 app, the app that was required to reserve an appointment with immigration officers. These participants chose to avoid government systems altogether as a form of protection from potential deportation or detainment. When asked if they used the CBP-1 app, one participant responded, No, thank God, no. Because honestly, I wouldn't like to, because it'd put me in more systems. Informational non-use is both a way to navigate asymmetrical power and a way to exploit people on the move. Here, unintentional non-use was a way to systematically remove the right to informed consent. However, informational non-use could also be used in ways that subvert the formalized pathways into the US, acting as a way to gain privacy and survive an ever-increasing technological dependence at the border. Moving to our final type of non-use, protective non-use. For people experiencing migration, devices were both highly important and yet precarious. Devices were needed for navigating legal pathways and for contacting family. Yet these same devices could also be used to harm and exploit them. To deal with this, participants often engaged in protective non-use, intentional practices to preserve privacy and safety. One participant shared how they limit their online commenting for fear of potential consequences with US immigration control. I try to be paranoid when I'm going to comment something. I commented without sounding against the President Trump or Elon Musk, because when I have my papers reviewed, the agent will say, "Oh yes, look at this tweet. You said we were bad." Here, caution was a survival tactic, showing how political fear shaped even mundane online interactions. Our findings show that non-use is not reducible to access or literacy, but instead is a pattern response to changing legal, relational, and infrastructural conditions. The border system depends on continuous online presence for identification and compliance, yet it systematically places people in migration in conditions where they cannot maintain their online presence. Non-use emerges from this contradiction, where visibility is required, but the ways to remain visible are unstable, inaccessible, or actively removed. To reimagine the way we design around non-use, we propose 3 design principles to treat non-use as an expected user scenario. To address the institutional removal of phones by the US government as part of device non-use, we propose that disconnection should be treated as an anticipated part of the journey. When designing for informational non-use, we must design for both intentional and unintentional non-use. When people were forced through systems without translation, we propose that accessible translational tools become inherent parts of the border system. And when people choose to stay out of government systems to protect themselves, we propose reimagining of what the border system offers, so that formal pathways feel like protection rather than a threat. And finally, designing for protective non-use, giving people real control over how visible they are online. Instead of putting the burden of visibility on the user, we should build in flexible, adjustable privacy settings, letting people decide exactly how much of themselves they share and when. To summarize the contributions of this study, our research looks at how people going through migration experience technology, and specifically how and why they don't use it. We're expanding how HCI thinks about non-use, particularly for vulnerable groups, where stepping back from technology isn't always a free choice. Sometimes it's driven by circumstances or by people who mean them harm. Sometimes it's driven by fear. We then develop design ideas that treat non-use not as an edge case or an afterthought, but as a completely normal and expected part of how people in migration interact with technology. This study shows that non-use is not a failure of a system, but is often a rational, intentional reaction to an unfair situation. Designing for non-use is not designing for failure. It is designing for the world as it is lived. Thank you, everyone. This work would not have been possible if not for the workers and volunteers in the Shelter Network of El Paso. Also, I'm an undergraduate. I'm looking for PhD positions. I'm interested in community collaborative work and qualitative methods. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. We have room for 1 or 2 questions. Please raise your hand up and a student volunteer will run and bring the mic to you. We have one over here.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you, in the sample of people you had, noticed differences in sociocultural backgrounds. So where most of your people, I don't know if it's the right assumption, poor people with low literacy skills?
It's really it's very context dependent. Some of our participants, as you described, had low literacy skills. Their primary language was Spanish. They didn't know much English. However, we also had participants who were from a higher socioeconomic class and had a little bit more resources when they were fleeing their country and were able to pay for flights rather than having to walk. So it was very context dependent.
One more question if anybody wants to squeeze one in. Okay, I won't hold everyone back from their coffee break. One more round of applause for all the speakers today. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Kai.